All right, here we go. We're back. This is going to kind of bounce around a little bit because it was part of last week's lecture. Anyway, it bounces around because this stuff is so interrelated from chapter to chapter. But let's start off with talking about functional assessment because that's kind of one of the keys to our entire system here. Now, oddly, functional assessment, when people write books about behavior mod, they have a hard time figuring out where to put this. The primary reason is because this is really what you do first. But in order to know what to do first, you have to know about the different components involved, and that's why it's showing up at the end of the book. Anyway, the basic idea, though, is that we're going to be looking for the causes of behavior, right? Or with assessment anyway, we're going to be looking at the likely causes of it. There's something called functional analysis, which we'll get into in a little bit, which definitely demonstrates the actual causes of behavior. It's an actual experiment, okay? So functional assessment, we're looking for those causes, or the likely causes. They can be several cases, there are several situations here, but primarily we're looking for the things that lead to behavior, in other words, the discriminative stimuli. If the behavior is under stimulus control, then we would be able to identify that hopefully using functional assessment, or hopefully be able to identify it using functional assessment. And then we also look for the reinforcers and things like that. So in that last chapter, of course, it talks about all those different tools that we're going to use, the interviews and things like that. So we're going to use everything we have available, both direct assessment, indirect assessment, that we can to perform this. Excuse me, that we can to perform this functional assessment. All right. But that said, again, I don't know. This is tough because a lot of people, when they do FA, functional assessment, they like to do a bunch of indirect measures. And there's a certain value to that because the idea with indirect measures is that I'm going to interview all those people that are familiar with the client or the person who's having the problem behavior and hopefully extract some useful information from them about what may be leading to behavior, what may be maintaining it, and those types of things. And obviously you're not going to ask it in those types of with those types of questions, but ultimately that's what you're trying to get at. You don't want to walk in there and say, "Oh, what's the discriminative stimuli for the behavior?" No, we don't actually say that, but we ask questions like, what's going on in this child? Let's say it's a kid in the school, so we say, what's going on at school when he misbehaves or she misbehaves, and whatever misbehaving means, right? And that's kind of getting at the SDs, right? And say, well, what happens when they misbehave? What do you do? And you can ask the teacher, and you can talk to parents. And it's valuable, but the problem is that you don't know if those people are telling the truth. You don't know how accurately they're doing their observations, so they may just be giving you a line, right? They may be just trying to answer your question without being honest about it, right? And not because they're trying to ruin your program, but because they just don't know. So from my perspective, we're going to focus most heavily on direct observation, and that is going to be what is really useful about functional assessment, is that we're going to get in there and actually observe the behavior. Okay? So let's look at the procedures. First off, describe the darn thing, all right? So describe the behavior in question and provide an operational definition for it. If you do not have an operational definition, game over, walk away. Right, because you will not be successful. It's just a guarantee about that. So we're going to describe that behavior in crazy detail like you guys have done for the various projects in this course. And again, the idea here is not just the operational definition, which is kind of what I said, but also get that functional definition. What value is this behavior performing? And we're going to tease apart that functional definition more, and that's the idea with functional assessment, right? So again, let's just look at the title of functional assessment as I digress a bit here and go into that and say that the reason it's called functional is not because it works, but we're saying functional, what is the function of the behavior? So that's what we're really trying to do with a functional assessment, right? So we're going to describe that behavior, and we're going to define ecological events, those things, the context in which it's happening. We're going to define antecedent events, right, for the behavior occurring and not occurring. Right? So what is actually going on and under what scenarios, right? And that's what we're at so far. Identify the consequences for inappropriate behavior. What's going on, right? So what does the person get out of misbehaving? Let's say it is a kid in the class. Maybe they're, throwing a pencil or something, but they only throw a pencil when they're asked to do something, and maybe the teacher hasn't put A and B together, and the idea there would be that obviously they're trying to escape something, right? So depending on the consequence. Maybe they get taken out of the room. Maybe they get removed from the task or told to sit in the corner. Well, no matter what it is, no matter what those of all those consequences, they all led to the same thing, which is that they got out of the task that they were being asked to do. Right? Another important thing that we want to do is ask what the person can do instead. So if you're working with a kid in a class, you'd say, well, what would you like the child to do? You talk to the teacher and say, what would you like them to be? This is the problem behavior. What would you like them to do? And again, the first thing that people are going to do is they're going to say, well, I want them to be a good child. They should be a good child. They get all fired up about that. And the problem there is that they need to define what that means so they can know when the kid's being good. As we've talked about in the past, sometimes just coming up with a definition and then starting to observe it, you realize, well, guess what? There's really not a problem here. It seemed like a problem for whatever reason, but oftentimes it isn't a problem. What should you avoid, right? What sort of behaviors do they not want? Do you not want them to do? What sort of procedures would you not want them to do? Can you avoid? Do you have to avoid punishment? Do you have to avoid food reinforcers? Are there contexts that automatically cause the behavior to happen? Are there people that you put? Let's say the kid's in a classroom and they sit next to somebody. Do they always argue with that person? That's one of those things that we can worry about. So maybe they should just avoid that particular person. Right? And what's the history? Let's look at the big picture here. Right? How long has this been going on? Is it new? Has it been a problem through multiple grades? Has it been a problem for multiple years? Has it been a problem with multiple teachers, multiple classrooms, multiple, whatevers, right? So what leads to this kid's problems, right? Are there medical issues? That's an important thing to ask as well. If in fact in school psych we talk about something called a manifestation determination, and that's where you make a determination that the problem behavior is a manifestation of a medical issue. If so, then you've got special procedures that you need to follow. Right? So that can be part of your functional assessment as well, to start to see if you can start getting at those medical issues. Okay. All right. Now, once you've done all of that sort of stuff, right? And again, this is oftentimes not direct at this point. This is indirect stuff. So now is when we get in and start the observations. And we're going to start doing a baseline, and we're going to get crazy accurate with our baseline, and we're going to look for behaviors that are competing with each other. Right? You want you want the kid to be on task in the classroom. Well, that's competing with off-task behavior. Okay? We often talk about competing contingencies, and that's really what we're getting at here, is that a competing contingency is something where you've got two different contingencies that are working against you, or are working against the kid. One is selecting for inappropriate behavior, one is selecting for appropriate behavior. So, for example, if you've got a competing contingency in the classroom, escape of a task may be a more powerful contingency than is completion of the task. They're competing. They're both functioning at the same time. They're both running, but one of them is more powerful than the other, so maybe we have to change that. Sometimes you have a punisher and a reinforcer that are competing. And like I've always said, punishers are going to lose. Generally speaking, punishers are going to lose over reinforcement any day of the week. All right. An example there would be, let's say you're punishing the kid for inappropriate behavior, but the kid is still behaving inappropriately, still getting out of those tasks. The reinforcer is winning. They're still escaping those tasks. And even though you're punishing, that's not really going to solve the problem. Not necessarily, anyway. Then we're going to provide a summary. After we've done all those observations, we're going to start to provide summaries of here's what we think is going on, and that's going to lead us to developing an intervention. So again, the summaries cover all of those things: the antecedent events, the consequences, the behavior in general, the ecological events, all those things. Right. So let's get on with the treatment program. After you've taken those summary assessments, right, you can then, or after you've written those, you can then formulate a program. Should you do it? That's the big question. Should we actually go ahead with the program? Because it's going to be a lot of work. All right? And the first question you should always ask is, who is going to benefit from this program? Is it the client? Right? Or is it someone else? So the client, this gets a little odd to talk about because maybe a teacher hired you to do some work. All right? But the client is really the person whose behavior you're changing. Okay? So is the client going to benefit from you implementing a procedure, or is the teacher going to benefit? Or is someone else going to be hurt in the process? Who really is this about? Right? And that's kind of a tough question to ask because obviously, well, it's a problem behavior, so it must be a problem for the kid. Maybe, maybe not. It might not actually be a problem for the kid. Escape from academic tasks is only a problem if you want them to learn. If you don't give two hoots about learning, then escape from an academic task is irrelevant, right? If you don't care if they learn the material or not, then escape from it's just completely fine. So throwing a tantrum or throwing a pencil or getting up and walking across the classroom to get a glass of water may be okay, right? At the very least, your program cannot be harmful to the client. If it is going to be harmful in any way, shape, or form to the client, stop there. Tell whoever the person is that you're working with that nope, this cannot continue for ethical reasons or whatever the case may be. Can the problem be operationalized? A lot of times you'll get a teacher that says, "Well, he's just a bad child," right, or something like that. Well, they're bad kids. I can't deal with them. They're bad kids. Fix it. You're a behavior modifier. Fix it. All right. Guess what? If you can't operationalize that bad child or problem behavior, whatever it is, you're done. Okay, walk away because there's going to be nothing you can do to improve the outcome in this scenario. Because they'll just come up with new behaviors or new examples, or they'll say something like, "Oh, it's just an attitude." Right? Attitude doesn't cut it for an operational definition. Oh, the kid has a bad attitude. What the heck does that mean to have a bad attitude? Does my cat have a bad attitude? Does my dog? Do I? Maybe I do have a bit of a bad attitude about this because I've dealt with this particular issue before and it pisses me off. Anyway, so if you can't agree on those very specific behaviors, if you can't operationalize them, walk away because you will fail. Right? And not the sense that you will fail at implementing a behavior change plan, but you will fail in the eyes of the person that's hiring you, because the kid will still be behaving inappropriately. Okay. Is the problem actually important? Or is this a kid being a kid? Is this a normal developmental issue? Is it a medical issue? Right? Maybe you got a kid in class that's sneezing all the time. It's disrupting the class. But guess what? Maybe your building is just dirty. Right? Maybe it's really dusty in the classroom. Maybe the kid's allergic to something that he's wearing or something in the environment. Who knows what it is? So is the sneezing a problem for everybody in the class? Well, kinda. How would we fix that? Well, we're not going to go to the kid and punish him for sneezing. That's for damn sure. All right. We're going to look in the environment and see if we can find some other solutions. Right? But again, always about this. Always getting back to this important thing. Is this really an issue, or is somebody just got a burr up their bum? Right? And you'd be surprised how oftentimes people just have a burr up their bum. All right? It is just one of those things that a teacher or a parent or whoever gets something in their head that this kid is being problematic, or they're always trying to undermine me, but maybe that's not actually the case when you sit down and actually operationalize things. Right? You never know, but you have to observe. You have to look and find out. Will you need another specialist? Are you going to need somebody else to come in and help you out? Are you going to need a medical doctor? Are you going to need some environmental engineer to address the issues in the classroom with regard to the clean air stuff, or whatever it is? The point is that, do you need anybody else? Be honest. Right? Your job and our job as behavior managers is simply to manage behavior. We're not out there to address anything else. We don't prescribe medication. We don't diagnose. We don't do any of that stuff. We don't diagnose ADD. We don't diagnose mental health issues. We deal with behavior and behavior alone. Right? Now, granted, that's a pretty broad area and it undercuts all sorts of stuff, including mental health issues, but we're not qualified, not trained, and legally not allowed to do diagnosis, and especially not in the medical area, but not even of mental health disorders. Right? So maybe you do have a kid that seems to be depressed on the surface. Well, guess what? Call up the school counselor, call up the school psychologist, and get them involved at that point. You don't want to work alone here. Right? In fact, good behavior modification programs are done as sort of a team approach. You're looking at everybody involved. All right. If you're in a school, you got the principal, you got the teachers, you got the parents, you got the kids, you got the other kids in the classroom. Everybody should be involved that you can get involved, or that needs to be involved, because that way you're really changing the environment for this kid and actually selecting the appropriate behaviors. Okay. Can this be easily managed or not? Right? Maybe the kid is standing up and throwing his desk across the room and doing all sorts of stuff. Who knows? Maybe it's not easily managed. Maybe you need somebody to specifically deal with this kid on a one-on-one basis, and it's not going to work in the classroom. Maybe it's something that's happening at home while the parents are away. And that's going to be a challenge to manage the behavior. Let's say a teenager that's a latchkey kid comes home, nobody's home, and they're doing inappropriate stuff while they're at home, like starting fires or something like that. Well, that's not going to be easy to manage. You're going to have to come up with some other techniques. And you're going to have to implement some other things. By that I mean maybe the kid would have to go to somebody's house, or maybe you're going to need somebody there at all times to watch the kid. Does the behavior go beyond the program? Can you generalize this stuff beyond the 6 weeks that you're going to be working with them? If not, stop. Your goal is permanent change, not temporary while I'm here change. Again, if you do your job right, you don't need to come back. You don't want repeat clients. That means you failed. Right? And I'm being a bit harsh, but you get the idea that we want to work ourselves out of a job. There's always new kids next year, so you're never really going to be out of a job. But the point is that you should be out of a job with that client. Once you're done with those changes, once you've worked with them and programmed for generalization and done all the stuff that we've talked about, then you're going to be able to move on, right? And hopefully their behavior will be fixed. It's always a fun one. Can you actually get the assistance from other people that you need? Will the teacher work with you? Will the principal work with you? Will the paraeducators work with you? Will the parents work with you? Will the other siblings work with you? Okay. And can you control the people that will stand in your way? You'd be surprised how often a teacher will undermine a treatment program. You'll be surprised how often a parent will undermine a treatment program. You need to be able to control their behavior as well, and a lot of times you won't. Let's say you've got a kid at home that's engaging in inappropriate behavior with his dad, back talking and doing whatever. But every time he back talks, dad gets pissed off, then mom gives a bunch of reinforcement and tries to make things okay for the kid. All right? And it doesn't have to be dad or mom. It can flip around. Maybe the kid's back-talking to mom and dad steps in and saves the day. Well, guess what? The kid just got reinforced for back-talking because dad walked in and saved the day. All right? You got all pissed, and mom got pissed off at the kid and started punishing him, and then dad's like, well, it's okay. Don't really worry about it. Let's go out and play Frisbee. Whatever, right? But the point is that there's that undermining going on, and it happens a lot. Right? So you need to make sure that those people that work with the client, other than yourself, that you actually have control with them and that they're on board. It's a certain amount of sales. Right? You got to sell yourself. You got to sell this program. You got to make the other people believe that if they don't do what you're suggesting, they will ruin it. They will waste money and they will ruin the program, and the behavior will not get fixed. And oftentimes this is something that they have to learn, that they don't know it offhand, because trust me, a parent going to somebody for help with their kid, that's a hard thing for a parent to do. And when they do it, then there's going to be a bit of a resistance because you're thinking about behavior. And analytic approaches, they're definitely not thinking about that. They're thinking about things from a perspective of Descartes, a mind-body distinction, and desires and wants and needs and emotional issues. And you're going to look at emotion from a sort of biological perspective, and then also looking at it from a classical conditioning and operating conditioning perspective. So there's going to be some conflict there, and they're probably not going to believe what you're doing right off the bat. So you need to get some successes, and the parents or the teachers or whoever might actually undermine you a little bit. But if you can show that what you're doing works, or that their undermining caused a problem, then you can then demonstrate that, hey, what you're doing is effective. And go back and look at those Nanny 911 videos, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Right? That's the parents will often undermine the nannies, and then it fails, and the nannies go in and train them. In fact, one of the big things about behavior mod programs are often about training the people that are in direct contact with the child, rather than training the child themselves. Right? So more often than not, you're working with the teacher to maintain these behaviors. You're working with the parents to maintain these behaviors as well. Are you qualified to deal with the issue? If you're not, walk away. Be honest. Have you dealt with a behavior like this before? Do you have a set of tools that you think are going to work? Or is this just too much? Okay? If you think it's too much, walk away. Right? Because you need to be keeping your professional head on here and not taking on too much. And also, are you available? Do you have enough time? Right? I don't get to do as much of this stuff as I would like. I've done some consulting in the schools. I've done some consulting with families. But I would like to be, spending at least a day a week out doing consulting. But I don't have the time. Right? I teach too many classes. I've got too much research going on. I've got too much service work going on from other perspectives. And right now, I don't have the time to be a consultant in this area. And I would love to, but I'm not going to tell somebody that I can work with their kiddo and then drop the ball because I can't be there the 3 days a week that I need to be there. Right? So you got to be honest with yourself. All right, we're going to zip through baselining because we've kind of already covered it. But again, the idea here, detailed and specific. Right? This is how you're going to develop the program. In a good functional assessment, you're looking for the ABCs, the antecedents, the behaviors, and the consequences. Okay? So with that functional assessment, we're going to go in gory detail about what's happening with the behavior. In fact, you write down too much information while you're doing an FA. You write down almost everything you can, and then you go back later and analyze that and look and see, are there patterns here? Right? Again, this is the observation side of things. You also see if those patterns match up with those indirect assessments that you've done. Okay. Take all that information, and at this point, this is where this becomes a really hardcore science. You take that information you gathered, and then you develop a program. You don't walk into it. You don't walk into a problem saying, ooh, I know what I'm going to do. I know what I'm going to do. Doesn't work that way. You walk in and you figure out the problem, and then you figure out how to solve it. Right? You take the tools that you have and apply them to the behavior that's there, not the other way around. You don't try to force the behavior into the tool, so to speak. You say, well, I really want to use a token economy. I love token economy, so I'm going to always do a token economy. Well, guess what? Maybe that's not appropriate. You got to use that. You got to use the behavior to guide you. This is database decision making. This is best practices approach. This is the type of thing you do. You know, every behavior you're going to run into has been researched, read about, evaluated, and studied before. Go to the literature and find out. Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. The Behavior Analyst as well. You know, there's all sorts of journals out there that are directly related to this stuff. Is there actually time for proper assessment? I ran into this a couple of years ago. I was working with a grad student, and we were wanting to do one of these things, and for a project, and because of legal issues and permission issues and things like that, the clock just kept ticking down. We went from 16 weeks to 10 weeks to 8 weeks to 6 weeks before we could even start, and the time frame there is meaning that the school year was going to end, right? And we couldn't actually get the whole thing done. So we actually had to back off and went to the teacher and said, because of A, B, C, and D, we're not able to continue with this problem. Let's try and see if we can solve it next year. Right? Interestingly enough, once the kid got into the new classroom, there wasn't a problem anymore. But that's a different issue. Again, back to that help or hinder thing. Are people going to stand in your way? And sometimes they will. So you got to try and you got to know if that's going to happen. You got to find out if people are available. Are they actually going to be able to do their work? Do they have enough time to help you out? Do they have enough time to record behavior in the classroom? If not, then you're going to need to train somebody up and get them in there. Maybe that's where you can use your paras in the classroom. Or maybe a parent doesn't have the time. You know, think about a single mom. Right? It's got a problem with a kiddo, and you're saying, well, I'd like you to do a functional assessment, and it's going to take this amount of data recording for this many weeks, and blah, 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 blah. And you're going to have to spend an hour a day watching the kid and recording everything you can record, and the single mom's just going to basically say, no, don't have the time to do that. I'm sorry, it's not realistic. Right? So you have to be able to figure out if the folks can help you or hinder you, and then react accordingly. Will the surroundings help or hinder? Think about the kids in the school. Are the other kids in the classroom egging this kid on, or are they left alone? Like I said earlier about the kid, the teenager coming home lighting fires. Well, if they're home by themselves, the surroundings are going to hinder you. Okay? Is the behavior occurring in a natural environment? Where are you going to be when you're recording the behavior? If the problem behavior is happening on the playground, but you only have access to the kid in the classroom, you're screwed. Right? It's not going to work. Right? And how much time do you have? Again, sometimes people just don't have a good assessment. And it's probably more often than not, really. They don't have a good assessment of how often something occurs. Because you tend to focus on certain things that, let's say a problem behavior happens and then it keeps happening and keeps happening. Maybe it's only happening once a month, but the fact that it's been happening every month gets you focused on it. You're like, my gosh, this kid just won't stop, right? And in reality, it's only happening once a month. Well, it's going to take forever to baseline that. Remember, we want 3 or 4 data points at a minimum for baselining. Okay, you're looking at 4 months, all right? If the behavior is only happening once a month and you're charging X amount of dollars an hour to be there, you never know when the behavior is going to happen. So you're looking at thousands and thousands of dollars just to capture a baseline. It's not realistic. Okay. How fast much the behavior change, whatever that means. How quick do you need the behavior to change? It must is what it should say, right? So how fast should the behavior change? Well, do you need it to change right now? Do you need it to change next week? Again, a lot of these things take a bit of time. Right? Don't forget about your extinction curves, your extinction bursts, all that stuff, competing contingencies, behavioral momentum, blah, 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 blah. It takes a while to get a behavior to change. All right, steps in building a good program. Right off the bat, I'm going to tell you this is more of an art than it is a science. And that kind of contradicts everything we've talked about already. And we talked a little bit about this previously, but the basic idea is that figuring out what technique to use in what situation for a behavior manager is a shaping process. So it's going to take you a while to figure out what to do and what's your go-to sort of thing when you've got an escape behavior or when you've got a back-talking behavior, those types of things. It depends on how it's maintained. It's going to take a while to figure out what to do. And some people are just great at this right off the bat. Okay? Some people are excellent. And they can just say, hey, this is the behavior that's happening. I think I got a great technique to use. Let's try this, blah, 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 blah. And then everything works and they're reinforced for it. Other people are going to have to struggle a little more and make some failures and before they start to have their successes. There are a few general things you can ask, though. Right? And there's a lot of them in your book. So look through those things. Right? Because those are the things that you need to know in order to build this quality program. As you become more of an expert and as you've implemented some of these things, then you'll start to realize which ones you can skip over and which ones are kind of automatic to know. Same thing happens with self-management projects. As you practice a self-management project and as you do 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, you're going to become much more effective at it. Some of you may be burning out on the recording that you're doing for your self-change plans. Well, that's normal. So over time, you'll figure out what exactly you do need to record. Right? So then it's okay to make some of those changes and adjustments as you go. But that's not something you would have known. That's not something I can teach you. That's just something you have to experience and learn on your own. Let's say you're done with the program. You better ask the question, did it work? Okay. And how do you know? In other words, capture data. All right. Record follow-up data. Come back in 3 months, see if it maintained. Call the teacher, call the parent. Hey, you having a problem with that behavior anymore? Or has it been completely under control? And the parent might say something like, well, you know what? It happens every now and again, but man, it's been really, really effective. Okay, cool. Move on. Right? Or maybe you call the parent and they say, this kid just has been out of line. It didn't work at all. I hate this thing. So, okay, well, why don't I get back in there and do a little bit more recording and I'll see if I can help you out a little bit. And you actually go and do some recording and you maybe do another baseline, so to speak. We're really thinking about maintenance here, so it wouldn't be a baseline, but you're just going back and recording and seeing how often that behavior is occurring. Now compare that to the original baseline and maybe it actually did work and the parents just, again, focused on the wrong thing, not focused on successes. Okay? What are you going to do if it didn't work? Did the behavior fail? Or did the behavior change plan fail? If so, you're probably going to implement something new. Okay? Again, if it did work, plan for follow-ups. Okay? If it didn't work, then you're going to go back and try new techniques. And you're going to keep hammering at this until you get the behavior under control. Cost-benefit analysis. What are you going to get out of it? What's the client going to get out of it? What are the people in the environment going to get out of it? Does it benefit folks? Does it not? Right? Is this going to cost more than it's worth? Right? Maybe the kid's just escaping some math tasks once in a while. Well, is it worth it to pay you $100 an hour or whatever your rate's going to be to get in there and fix the problem? Or is this something that can be dealt with in a different way? So So not just in terms of dollars, but the work that's going to be involved for everybody, the changes that are going to happen to the classroom, the changes that are going to happen at home. Is it going to work out? Okay. If you are successful, you need to tell people about it. This is what journals are for. This is what, you write up your results. You talk about these plans at conferences. You go to professional meetings and you interact with folks and say, here's what I've done in this situation, because you owe it to the scientific community to share your successes with them. Okay? The idea is this is database decision making. This is science. It's going to build on itself. You're using other people's research to come up with your stuff. Right? Well, to your interventions and your programs, then you have to contribute back to that. You ethically owe it to the body of people that are doing this work to give back. Right? This is much like the open source world. Okay, open source, free software, right? You go and you get the software, but you owe it to the community to give back somehow. Maybe that's just some software testing. Maybe that's contributing a little bit, financially to the software development team. Who knows? But the idea is the same thing here. If you are going to use everybody's procedures, and you're using procedures that have been around for 50 years now, so that's 50 years worth of work. If you're going to jump right in and grab those techniques, you owe it to give back. And the easiest way to give back is share your successes. And you know what? This doesn't necessarily have to be just at a professional meeting. Maybe it can be with family members. Maybe it can be with friends. And you say, hey, this is how I solved this problem. You're sharing it. You're passing it on. You're generating your research, and you're giving that information back to everyone that needs it. All right. That's that. See you soon.